and increase both the readability and the persuasiveness of the essay. So yeah, we're going to look at persuasive language and what we can do to add different things in to our essay. We're going to look at transitions and transitional phrases, and we're also going to look at some different literary devices that we can use to kind of spice up our essay. Because again, if we're thinking of it like a hamburger, we don't just want a bun, 3 pieces of meat, and another bun, and we call it, that's a burger. We want to add in all those things that add flavor. So whether it's, lettuce and tomato, it's cheese, it's ketchup, whatever you want to think of it as, these literary devices and these other elements, these other persuasive language examples are going to be things that are going to take your essay from something that's very simple, maybe, and making it into something that has a lot more elements to it. It's a lot different from just stating facts outright. And hopefully it's going to be something that's going to increase the persuasiveness and change the opinion of the reader. So let's get started. And again, as always, if you have a question or a comment, uh, just turn on the mic, say something, get my attention. I'll be more than happy to kind of stop and get you guys squared away if you do have a question. But yeah, here we are. So we are looking at what I called enhancing your writing proficiency. So again, we're looking at persuasive language, we're looking at transitions, we're looking at some literary devices, and I'm going to give you quite a few examples, although some of them will be easier to use than others, or you'll be excited to use some more than others. But I've given you a lot more just so you know that there are a lot out there and they can all be used to enhance or make your writing better, make it more interesting, make it more persuasive. And the last thing is we have some tips for actually becoming a better writer. And the reason why I've included that at the very end is because we are hopefully this week going to be moving into writing our rough draft. So you should have done the outline. You should have most of your essay ready. We just need to put them into full sentences. So you'll have today, tomorrow, Friday. I think I put the due date on Sunday for the essay. So you have several days to work on it. It doesn't have to be perfect, obviously, but what we're looking for is, a rough draft, a first draft. Um, and this will open up at 11:15. But like it says here, it is finally time to write our essay. You should be well prepared for this if you've completed all the assignments and lessons until now. So use the outline you created to write a rough draft of your essay. Remember to follow the structure that we discussed in class. Try to use some of the persuasive elements that we're going to discuss today to enhance your essay. And please include at least 2. I think I need to add that in there, but please include at least 2 of the literary devices. And then also try to use, the transitions and the transitional phrases that we're going to talk about. And just in general, use more descriptive and persuasive language when possible. And then also try to keep in mind the rubric that we discussed during our first lesson, and try to remember what I told you about how we grade here at the school. So each category is 25 points, but to be honest, we're not weighting them equally. They still get the same amount of points, but we're not grading some categories as harshly or as strong as others. So as I put here, as students of Gyeongbuk Foreign Language High School, you guys are already a step above most other Korean high school students as far as your English language skills. And so we expect you to already have, like I wrote here, a solid handle on your vocabulary and your grammar. It should be pretty solid. So we're going to hold you to that, but I'm not looking at your grammar and your vocabulary. If it's not correct or if it's inconsistent, I'm going to mark it and I'm going to leave it up to you to grade it. But on the other hand, the part that I'm really looking for and the part that I'm definitely going to be giving you more feedback on if it's missing is going to be things like the creativity portion. So we want you to move past telling us the facts. Don't just say what, but give us the how and the why. We need that explanation in those body paragraphs, and that's where your score is really going to go up or down when you actually write your essays for your performance assessments next year. So if you want to earn a high score, the creativity, the explanation point is where all of those important points are scored. If you want to have the highest score, if you want to win the essay contest, that's what we're looking for. So you will be writing a rough draft this week, but again, you have today, which is Wednesday, you have Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday if you absolutely need it. I've given you plenty of time to work on it so that we can get into editing next week. So that will be the assignment. But yeah, let's get into class, an actual lesson today. So the first thing that we need to look at is persuasive language, right? So what kind of language can we use to increase the ability of our writing to change the mind of the reader? Because again, your thesis statement is an opinion. You want the reader to agree with that opinion at the very end of your essay. And so I've written several different examples here of persuasive language. But there's different types. There's different ways that you can move into trying to convince the reader of your opinion or of a different way of thinking. So the different types of persuasive language that we use in our writing, you can see here we use adjectives, we use adverbs, we do use rhetorical questions, we use this idea of imagery, or what I'll call like highly detailed descriptions. And then we also use this thing called hyperbole, which can be kind of described as an exaggeration, although we'll kind of talk about what the difference is between the two. But yeah, hyperbole, and then of course, emotive words, with emotive being just the word that means we're trying to use emotion. So words that are emotionally charged. So, but the first thing that we can do to make our writing more persuasive is we can use persuasive adjectives, right? So persuasive adjectives are going to be any adjective that helps convince your reader of something, right? So you're describing, because that's what an adjective, that's what an adjective does, but it's something that's going to convince your reader. Um, and so the idea of using persuasive adjectives is that you're going beyond just the simple, right? So we're not saying something is good or bad. It's not very persuasive. It has a very base meaning. Everyone's like, oh, it's just good. Okay. It's okay. But if we want to say something is, cute, cute's okay, but adorable, okay, adorable is much more persuasive. It has a lot more. It's like, wow, that's cute times 1,000, right? So something's not good. It's amazing. Okay. And so words like excellent, okay, amazing, outstanding are much better than just good. So you want to help the reader understand it's not just good, but it's the most good it can possibly be. It's gooder than good. It's the goodest. But of course, we can't use gooder and goodest. Those aren't real words. So we say things like excellent, outstanding, fantastic, right? Something is perfect. Okay. It couldn't be better. It's wonderful. So any words that, and again, we'll get to emotive language later, but any words that, carry over a positive or a negative connotation can be extremely persuasive to the reader, right? So if it makes them feel the emotion that goes behind those words, like adorable, like, oh, you just want to hug it, it's like a cute little puppy. That's persuasion. Okay, you've made them feel something. So definitely persuasive adjectives are something that you want to get used to using in your writing. But adjectives are going to be used to describe nouns, but we can also use persuasive adverbs, right? And so the modal adverbs are the ones that we're going to be mainly focused on, but they're ones that are going to strengthen our argument. And again, you want to convey to the reader, you want them to understand that the opinion is not just an opinion, but it's one that's backed up by, your arguments. And so you don't want to just say that it is, the sky is blue. Okay. Sky is blue. Okay. But when you say the sky is obviously blue, you're conveying to the reader that, that's something that even a small child should understand. I shouldn't have to tell you that. And if you are learning it for the first time, then you should really feel bad and really pay attention, because if you think that's great, just wait till I tell you more. Okay. So, you want to make it seem as if your opinion that you're presenting in your thesis statement is the only correct or only possible answer. Okay. And so you use words like certainly. Okay. Because it's certain. There's no question. Or you want to use absolutely. There is no doubt that cats are the best pet because of their superior cleaning skills. They clean themselves and keep themselves. Uh, so all of these modal adverbs, you're using them to strengthen your argument. You want the reader to understand it's not by accident, it's not by chance that you've picked your topic as the topic that you're arguing. It has to be clearly, definitely, really the answer. So those adverbs, again, they're just going to help augment your or enhance your arguments. Now uh, another bit of persuasive language that you can add into your essays and into your writing in general are the rhetorical questions. And we're going to talk about these a little later when we get into literary devices as well. But rhetorical questions can be highly effective if they're used correctly, but they can also be used incorrectly, especially if you use them too often. But first, let's get into what is a rhetorical question. So a rhetorical question is a question that you don't want or don't need the answer to. So if you say something in an essay, you're not actually wanting the reader to, write you a letter and say, yes, I did do that, or no, I haven't. It's just a question to get reader thinking about the same topic as you. So for instance, you do this last one, your essay could start with a hook that's a rhetorical question, and it could be something like, do you remember the first time you ever tried chocolate ice cream? Obviously, you don't need the reader to say out loud, yes, I remember the first time I've had chocolate ice cream. It's just a way of introducing the idea of chocolate ice cream and whatever your topic is going to be about. So chocolate ice cream is delicious, or chocolate ice cream is boring unless you also have this, or, did you know that the chocolate used in chocolate ice cream is bad for you? It could be anything. But a rhetorical question is just simply a question that you don't want or don't need the answer to, but you're still asking it just to introduce the topic. And we do this a lot in speeches as well. When you begin a speech and you ask the audience a question, a lot of times you're not looking for a response. right? Um, when you say something like, have you ever done something so embarrassing that you wanted to just, crawl into a closet and hide forever? You don't need the audience to start raising their hands and offering examples. Um, Now, you have to be careful because not all questions that you ask in a speech uh, are going to be rhetorical. Like sometimes you're like going to say things like, um, "How many of you, or rather, raise your hand. How many of you have ever uh, gone to a theme park and ridden a roller coaster?" And maybe you do want them to answer. And you'll count hands, be like, okay, it looks like 17 of you, so half of you have gone. Um, was it a fun trip? And then you're asking for some audience interaction. So in those cases, you need to make it clear that you do want feedback. Um, but in the sense of rhetorical questions, um, you say things like, who doesn't like uh, who doesn't like ice cream on a hot day? You're not actually asking for anybody to say, "Oh, I don't like ice cream." Yeah, you're just going like, "Yeah, it's common knowledge. Everybody likes ice cream on a hot day," and then you move on. So make sure that if you're asking a rhetorical question, that you're using it appropriately. It's used to introduce a topic. You're not actually looking for an answer. So, but definitely a useful thing to use in writing and also in speech writing. Um, the only warning that I will give, and it's something that I know Angela and Bella teachers um, are kind of picky about, please don't overuse rhetorical questions. Some students use them repetitively, so they'll ask 2 or 3 questions in a row. Um, and while they're using rhetorical questions correctly, the the common idea is that you don't use multiple rhetorical questions in a row, and you should probably only use at most 2 in your entire essay. So don't have one in every paragraph. Kind of use them sparingly. So use it to make a point, but don't overuse them. So yeah, 2 definitely at the most, uh, because if you overuse them, they will definitely grade you lower. I don't know how Michael feels about them, but yeah, it can just be a little messy. You're asking too many questions, and what it feels like as a reader when you start asking a lot of rhetorical questions is it almost begins to give this idea of you don't know what you're talking about, and that's why you're asking the reader. Like maybe the reader should be telling you instead of the writer. So be careful with them, but they can be a very useful thing, especially if you're using them in your hook or at the beginning to kind of draw an idea forward so that the reader's thinking about it. So another bit of persuasive language that we can use in our writing is the idea of imagery, or I'll call extreme description. And so imagery, as you can see here, is painting a picture or creating a scene using your words. And so you tell the reader everything that they should be observing, everything they can see using their imagination, because you're using their 5 senses to kind of trigger different memories or uh, ideas about what something looks like or something sounds like. So you don't just want to say, uh, for instance, um, there was a blue ball in the room. Oh, it's blue. What color blue? Give some description. So, where is it in the room? How far is it, from you? Is it near? Is it far? So when you use imagery, you start talking about, um, um, Minkyu, because he's not here. We'll pick on him. Minkyu had left his soccer ball in the center of the room. It sat there like a small, you know, like a small globe, blue, like the color of the sea where it meets the sand on Jeju. It's sat. You could describe the mud on the side of it. From when they were playing with it last. It's you know mud still clung to the side like, oh, I don't know what clings, like snow on the side of a hill. Uh, it had a rough touch. You don't want to just say it had a scuff mark on it. You want to say, as I ran my fingers across the surface, I could feel the scuff marks of hours of hours of playing soccer, on the volleyball court after class, with my friends before we had to go to uh, study at our Hagwons. Use, the five senses. Use what they can see. Use what they can smell. Um, Use hearing. Use touch. Use taste. And then I've added in there, even at the bottom, it's not quite a sense, but use the feelings and emotions that the reader has experienced, and use them to describe whatever it is that you're trying to convey to them. So don't just say the cat is fluffy. Describe exactly how fluffy it is. What does it feel like? Okay, what does it look like when that cat has like the most luxurious soft fur? It's like the softest cashmere scarf you've ever put on, um, mixed with the fluffiest pillow you've ever laid on. Right? It just feels like you're petting a cloud made of happiness and rainbows. Right? So that's an extreme example. You're almost being weird at the very end there as you're trying to describe it, but you want the reader to be able to vividly and clearly understand what that cat looks like. It's not just a fluffy cat. What's the color? Okay. What does the fur look like? What does it feel like? What does when you're describing an outdoor scene, what does it look like? The snow is falling, but what does the snow look like? What does it feel like? If you reach out and touch it, is it that dry, fluffy, powdery snow? Is it that wet, sticky snow? What's it taste like in the air? You don't have to taste the snow, but what's the air taste like? Is it clean? Is it crisp and cold? Does it feel dry? Um, is it dusty and kind of humid and gross outside? What's it sound like? Is it really quiet? Can you hear the snow? What's the wind like? A lot of those things you take for granted because you're seeing the scene, you're trying to describe this picture to someone, but the more you use that imagery, the more you paint the picture with your words, the more the reader or the audience in general is going to be able to understand exactly your point. And that's where the persuasiveness comes in. You have to make them feel exactly the way you do if you want them to agree with your opinion, especially if they didn't agree at all at the beginning, if they had the opposite opinion. So, imagery is definitely a very strong uh, element that can be used in persuasive writing. And so something else that we can use in our writing is the idea of hyperbole. And hyperbole is going to be a form of exaggeration, and it's when we say something that is um, emphasized way beyond what it normally would be. So it's bigger, it's greater, it's smaller than anything else. Um, and the idea is when a reader reads it, they know not to take it literally, right? So we don't mean it exactly, but we're using it as an exaggeration, and it's normally just like on a crazy proportion. And so, for example, down here, I saw the smallest dog ever. Is it the smallest dog ever? Are you sure? Uh, or I just ate the most delicious pizza in the whole world. I'm sure it was very delicious. It might have even been the best pizza you've ever eaten, but are you sure it's the most delicious pizza in the whole world? So, it's an exaggeration, but the idea is that it's convincing the reader. It's emphasizing the point, like it's the most of something. Um, and I say most because we very often or almost always use the superlative um, when we're trying to use hyperbole. So we would use, an adjective that ends in est, like the smallest, or the largest, the biggest, the loudest. And then, of course, for the superlative, if it's not one of those that takes the est ending, we also just make it the most something. So the most delicious, the most tasty, tastier, tastiest. Yeah, so not most tasty. Um, what's another one? The most beautiful scene uh, of the mountain, right? We wouldn't say beautifuler. We would say more beautiful, or in this case, the superlative, the most beautiful. So it was the most beautiful sunset 2 days ago after the snow, walking home from work. The sun came out as it was setting over the mountain. It was the most beautiful sunset I have seen ever. Yeah. So maybe not ever, but it felt like it. It was very pretty. We can also use a crazy comparison to also use exaggeration and hyperbole here. So I am so hungry, I'm going to die. Right? I don't think that when I say that, I'm actually starving to death. Um, but you understand, I am extremely hungry, right? Or as the one says here, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. Ooh, well, I don't think I could eat an entire horse, but you understand, if I say I could eat a horse, I'm ready to eat a lot of food, right? We're going to go eat a lot of samgyeopsal. So we also, we could say things like, "Oh, it was the worst when I went to the doctor. We waited for an eternity." Well, eternity means forever, so I don't think we waited for a forever before we got to see the doctor. But you understand, we had to wait a really long time. Uh, and then things like the room erupted with noise, right? It's not a volcano. It didn't erupt. There was no explosion. But you understand that means it suddenly went from being super quiet to all of a sudden there was a lot of noise. There were people yelling, people screaming, lots of laughter, lots of applause, maybe, right? So suddenly, we found out the news and everybody wanted to be, talking about it. We found out. Um, so think of those videos you've seen where fans are watching a soccer game, for instance, and all of a sudden a goal is scored, and you see the whole room just, immediately just start cheering really loud. That would be the room erupted with noise. So hyperbole is just going to be an exaggerated point or comparison. Right? So we use it to not be taken literally, but just to emphasize it. And then we have the idea of emotive words and emotive language. An emotive is just going to mean things that evoke emotion, right? Emotive, emotion, um, kind of like the word emoji. Um, it's things that we can use to convey emotion. So much like the smiley face, or the frowny face, the crying face, the one with the little heart eyes. we're using symbols with emoji, but here we're using words or language that can help the reader understand more of the emotion. Um, and these kind of go in line or go along with the idea of using, imagery and description. So use adjectives that are persuasive, or use nouns and use adverbs and even verbs. Use the ones that carry the emotion that you're trying to convey. So don't say, if you were hurt, don't just say, oh, I was hurt. You want to say you were in agony. Oh, it was the worst. I thought they were going to have to cut my leg off. It was so bad, right? Or don't say something was bad. It's not, oh, the situation was bad. No, it was a disaster. It's terrible. Something's not just sad. Oh, when I found out that they weren't going to, have the coffee that I liked anymore, it was tragic news to hear. Yeah, it's a little over the top. It's a little exaggerated, but use words that have emotion because, again, you want the reader to feel your words because they can't hear them. You don't have the ability to use drama like you do in a presentation or a speech. You can't tell them and use volume or speed to speed up and slow down, to go up and go down with your tone. Um, you have to use the language that's going to convey that emotion to them. Um, and I kind of put a note here. This was taken from um, instructions that Bella gave to the second year students uh, at the end of last semester when they were getting ready to write. And I thought it was a good idea to include it here because it is a very clear um, kind of understanding of how important this is. If you can make us lie, if you can make us laugh, especially laugh out loud as we're reading your essay, if you can make us cry, um, if you can make me, think of other things that make me happy or make me sad or make me angry, uh, just because of the language that you use in your essay, I can guarantee you're going to get a perfect mark for persuasive language. That's mission accomplished. You've made it. Um, what you want to avoid is using simplistic language that, as you're writing and as the reader is reading, it just is kind of boring, right? You don't want to bore anyone. You want them to feel the emotion behind it. If you have a strong enough opinion that you are going to write about it and tell people why they should go to the city of your choice, uh, make them feel excited for going there. Make them feel sad that they've missed out on never having seen the things that you are so happy to tell them about. Make them excited uh, and feel genuine regret that they haven't gone to go do that thing yet, but feel the urge or the push to, I have to go do it now. Like, let me go buy a ticket. I'm going to that city tomorrow, or I'm going this weekend, right? So try to use that emotive language. Use those words that have emotion behind them. So again, go back real quick. Persuasive language. Um, there are adjectives that we can use. There are adverbs. We can use rhetorical questions. We can use imagery or hyperbole. And of course, we really want to use emotive words and language if we can uh, in our essays. So do you guys feel good with persuasive language? One yes. Yes, good. All right. So transitions is the other major thing that we need to talk about today. So transitions in general, the idea is just that to make things very clear for the reader, we don't want to just run from one argument right into the next. And so we use transitions, or more specifically, transitional phrases to move uh, from one argument to the next, and we're signaling to the reader that we're either finishing with one topic, so we're wrapping up, uh, or what I was talking about was this, but here is a brand new argument, right? And so there's different transitional phrases that we can use. So some of them are going to show frequency. And so we say things like always, um, or usually, when it's not always, but almost always. So usually, or generally, often, occasionally, uh, and then of course you can also do ones that show a lack of frequency as well. So it's not just that it's often, but rarely would be something, or not as often. So, and we can also have transitional phrases that emphasize something. So things like obviously, absolutely, it should be noted, uh, undoubtedly, unquestionably, anything that kind of drives home kind of the point, like we were talking about earlier with um, our adverbs that are, or persuasive adverbs. But here we're emphasizing to the reader that this is pretty clear, like it should be obvious. Um, the ones that you'll probably use most often are going to be the ones that either add or contrast. So if we're adding something, if we're making another paragraph, we're moving from paragraph 1 to paragraph 2, or we're adding another example to a paragraph that already had a clear example, then we can add something. And so you say things like furthermore, in addition, next, second, although second comes down in order. But that you're adding on like um, another example. Additionally, um, you can do any of those phrases to kind of indicate that you're moving to a second or another argument or example or even another idea. Uh, and so the same thing happens with the contrast ones, right? So if you want to portray the opposite side uh, of an argument, so for our cat essay, cats are adorable, cats are cute, and now you want to say something, you want to mention another pet and why it's not a good choice. Um, you could say like, unlike the ease that cats present, dogs present uh, much more of a challenge in ownership. You must walk them all the time. They don't go to the bathroom in a litter box. You know, or you've made your argument and you're like, alternatively, as an alternate idea, you can do this. Da, 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 da. Even so, despite all of these, some people still don't think that cats make a good pet. However, uh, I think that they just haven't met the right cat, or haven't actually owned a cat and just have a poor opinion based on stereotypes. So it's important to use these transitional phrases when we're moving to different ideas, when we're contrasting, when we're talking or comparing different ideas, or when we're giving order. So some of the ones that get used most often are these transitional phrases for giving order. Uh, and you want to try to avoid being very uh, plain with just using the order transitional phrases. So you don't want to start your first body paragraph with first, comma, cats are adorable. And then your next paragraph, second, cats are fluffy, period. And then your third paragraph, third, or lastly, it's okay to mix in some of these other ones, but anything that you use to transition, to show this is the beginning of a new idea, or this is the end and I'm wrapping up my idea, is still going to go a long way in helping the reader understand your plan and see the differences in your arguments and how you've got them set up. And so I've included this nice chart here, although you can find a lot more online. But here are some kind of groups of what I'll call linking words, which are the words that we use for transitions. So again, in order, so you have first or firstly, second, secondly, third, finally, before, last but not least. So if you're trying to order something, those are words you can use. Here you can see the contrast words. So nonetheless, in contrast, alternatively, conversely. And that would be different from comparison, right? Contrast is showing difference. Comparison is showing normally how things are alike. So this is alike and this is different. So if you want to say, um, likewise, dog owners feel that their pets are, adorable just as much as cat owners. Um, However, cats, are easier to photograph and put pictures on Instagram. Whatever your comparison is going to be. So you can use those to show when something is the same and when something is different. For a lot of the ends of your um, essays, you can either use some of these result or these summary transitions to begin your conclusion paragraphs. Um, Try not to use in conclusion. It's overdone. Everybody does it when they first start writing. They're like, oh, it's a conclusion. So in conclusion, uh, it's much better to try to use some of these other linking words to just kind of set your essay apart. So, to summarize or in summary, to conclude, um, for this reason or for these reasons, as a result. There's a lot of different ways that you can kind of link those words together. And then you see some others. So if you're talking about uh, getting someone to change, you're like, if that is the case, then this will happen. If you are trying to present a counterpoint, another point of view, you can use a concession, say, up to a point, this is true, however, and then explain how still your argument is the superior one. It's better than the others. So a lot of these, I've left them here. You obviously won't use all of these in one essay. You can't. It would be nonsense to try. Um, but you do want to try to sprinkle in some of these and use different ones uh, across your writing. So you don't always want to say first, second, last for your body paragraphs. Use other words to convey different feelings. And so, how do we use these transitional phrases? Right. So the first example is we can use them at the end of a paragraph. So at the end of a paragraph, you should be using some sort of transitional sentence to uh, kind of end the discussion of this topic and then hint at what the next paragraph will be about. So here, our example is the first paragraph, the one that we're ending, is talking about how dogs are friendly. And then the second one will be about how they can give you exercise. And so the example of our transitional sentence, as you can see, dogs friendly dogs. I don't know why dogs is apostrophe s. It shouldn't be. So um, dogs friendly behavior makes them without a doubt the best animal. There are, however, many other reasons why they are so wonderful, such as the many health benefits they provide. So again, we're kind of showing, we're shifting, we're changing our thinking. So we're moving here not quite concession. What would be the right one here? I guess it's still a concession. So we're conceding. We're giving the point. Um, the behavior is what makes them the best animal. There's no doubt. But there are other reasons, and then we kind of gave the hint. It will be about health benefits. So you can definitely end your paragraph with a transitional sentence, and that would be a good use of transition. But you can also alternatively, and so don't do both. You can also have a transitional sentence at the beginning of that next paragraph instead. So you don't have to hint at it at the beginning, but you do if you don't do it at the end, you need to start the next paragraph with a sentence that clearly shows we are changing topics, right? So if we use the same topics as before, um, with dogs are friendly and then dogs give you exercise, then the new paragraph might start with this transitional sentence. So, in addition to the friendly nature of dogs in general, they also provide excellent exercise as they require frequent walks. So, here we're using, why do I keep doing that? In addition, which would probably go in here to just an under addition. So we're adding on another point, right? So it'd be, instead of saying second, we could also say second. Second, the friendly nature of dogs in general provides excellent exercise as they require frequent walks. We're showing the reader that we had one topic and now that was argument one, but here's argument two. So adding on, here's another reason why dogs are superior. Right? So you can do it at the end of a paragraph in that last sentence, or you can do it in the first sentence of the paragraph and do it as part of your topic sentence. That's what it's called. Either way, transitional sentences and phrases, we definitely want to add them into our essays where we can, uh, just to make it clearer to the reader. This is the changing uh, topic. We were talking about this topic. Now we're moving on to a different one. So that is transitions. So the only thing we have left to talk about today is literary devices. And we've already talked about a few of them. So I'll go over these kind of quickly. And I'll leave them in the PPT for you guys to look at if you want to try to use them more. Some of them at the very end, it's just to tell you about them, but I'm not expecting you to use some of them. Just because some are more appropriate for persuasive writing than others. So literary devices in general, kind of like the theme for today, they're used to enhance your writing, and some are going to be more appropriate, like I just said, for persuasive essay writing than others, whereas others might be more effective for narrative writing uh, or poetry and lyrical forms of writing and expression. So, for instance, things like rhyme are going to be difficult to use in a persuasive essay, but if you're writing music, lyrics, or if you're writing poetry, then rhyme is going to be much more effective and useful. But literary devices in general are just going to be used to, flavor or enhance your writing. So the examples that I've come up with, and again, we've seen a couple of these things already today, but we have similes, we have metaphors, we have hyperbole, we have analogies, we have rhetorical questions, uh, the idea of something that we're going to talk about called onomatopoeia, rhyme, and repetition. So the first thing, the first literary device we have is a metaphor. And so kind of to give you the example here, um, the literary device is going to be in red at the top. The black is going to be the definition. and then blue is going to be the examples. So a metaphor is going to be a comparison between two unlike things. So we're making a comparison even though the things really don't share much in common, and it's that difference that we're trying to convince the reader of. So for instance, life is a roller coaster, right? So we don't mean that literally, but what we mean is life goes up and down, um, and in that way, it's kind of like a roller coaster, right? Roller coasters go up and down. You have some things that make your stomach go, "Ooh, I don't feel good." That's like life, but we don't have to explicitly say that it's like or it's kinda. We just say life is a roller coaster, and it's that metaphor, it's that comparison that is going to convey the emotion and the persuasion. If you're really mad at one of your teachers because they gave you a lot of homework, um, or you think she's just, a bad person, you just don't like her, she's always out to get you. You might say something like, "Oh, my English teacher is a witch." Is she really a witch? No, but in saying that, by comparing, again, two unlike things, we understand your emotion, how you feel about that teacher at the moment, right? You're probably not always mad at that teacher, but right now, something has got you very upset, and we're excited to hear it. So, a comparison between two unlike things is a metaphor. Now, uh, similarly, similarly, a simile is going to be a comparison of two unlike things, but we're going to add in the use of the words either like or um, as part of that comparison or the description. So he was as brave as a lion. So he was brave, just like a lion is brave. Uh, the other example we have here, the alarm went off like a bomb, and it exploded in noise. You were just sleeping, you're just sitting there, just having your dreams, and all of a sudden, just this explosion of sound goes off. Uh, way too early. You got to get up and get ready for class. But it's that like, right? So we understand it's a comparison. It's like a bomb, or he's as brave as a lion. And so the important thing that we're trying to get across here is that uh, all similes, all of these are going to be metaphors because they are a comparison, but not all metaphors are similes. So similes are going to be metaphors that use like or as. So all of these, this counts as a metaphor as well, but it's only a simile, whereas life is a roller coaster is just a metaphor. Life is like a roller coaster would be a simile as well as a metaphor. So similar, not the same. Um, one is a part of that group and one is not. The other comparison literary device we have is an analogy. And an analogy is going to be a comparison of two things that have at least something in common. So whereas these are two unlike things for similes and metaphors, analogies have at least one thing that they share in common, that they're similar. Um, and like I said here, an analogy is going to be um, it's similar to the purpose of a simile and a metaphor. It's trying to draw um, attention to how two things are alike. Um, but with an analogy, it's about making a point with the comparison. So it's not just that, he's as brave as a lion, but we're trying to explain something. We're not showing, but explaining. And so here's an example. Let's say that uh, you're walking on the sidewalk outside, uh, and it's a really, really windy day, right? Super windy day. And you see this guy out in front of his store, and he's trying to sweep leaves, And every time that he kind of sweeps up some leaves, you see that, the wind is blowing and it's just blowing all the leaves around. So every time he tries to get them into a pile, they blow away. There's more leaves that blow up in front of his door. He's not getting anywhere, right? So the analogy that we would say is, if we're describing what he's doing, what you're doing is as useful as rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. And so if you don't know the Titanic was a big passenger ship that sank. It was supposed to be unsinkable, but it sank after hitting an iceberg. So as it's sinking, the idea of kind of moving the chairs around on the deck of a sinking ship, is that useful? Probably not. So again, the speaker's comparing the task to arranging deck chairs on the Titanic, but we're not just trying to compare them. Again, we are trying to explain. So what do we mean by using this? Well, by comparing it to a useless task like rearranging those deck chairs on the Titanic, we're kind of pointing out that sweeping leaves in this really, really high wind is just, it's useless. It's not a useful thing to be doing, right? So we're not saying directly with a like or with an as. It's not a simile, right? But what we're doing is we're drawing attention to something else, and so we're presenting another thing that is like that, if that makes sense. So analogies are slightly different because they do have something that's clearly a shared. What am I trying to say here? Got lost. Um, they do have a shared similarity. There's something they share, at least one thing in common. But you're talking more about the explanation of how, um, not just the showing that it's useless. We don't want to say it's, that is useless, but we want to say how it's useless. Explain, give some imagery and some other emotive language behind it. So what's the difference then between metaphor and simile and analogy? So a simile is saying something is like something else. Uh, a metaphor is often much more poetic. It's saying something is something else. So it's not saying like a roller coaster, life is a roller coaster. That's a little more poetic or a little more exaggerated. Um, and meanwhile, an analogy is saying something is like something else to make an explanatory point. So it's not the fact that it's what you're doing is like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic is not just saying it's like that, but it's the point that both of them are useless right now. Like you could probably be doing something more useful with your time. Wait till the wind stops blowing and then you can sweep up the leaves. And so ultimately the point is, you are using metaphors and similes when you're creating analogies most of the time. And then, like I said, a simile is a type of metaphor. All similes are metaphors, but not all metaphors are similes. So hopefully that explains the differences. But if you have a question, then I'd be more than happy to answer it later or give you more examples if you need them. But I think you guys will be able to figure it out. So let's move on. So one of the ones we talked about earlier that counts as a literary device is hyperbole. And hyperbole is going to be an exaggerated statement that is not meant to be taken literally. So things like, we've waited for an eternity. The room erupted with noise. Oh, this is the worst day of my life. And, oh, this bag weighs a ton. Right? So all these things, super exaggerations. We did not wait forever. Um, the room did not explode because of noise. Um, it was a very bad day, but not certainly the worst day. And of course, the bag does not actually weigh a ton. It's just really heavy. and we don't want to carry it. Another one we've already touched on is rhetorical questions. So questions that don't require an answer, and we're using them to make a point. So things like if you're just talking out loud, oh, what did teachers ever do for us? Obviously, when you say things like that, you're just frustrated. Um, you're not looking for your classmates to all turn to you and go, actually, they did this for us, and they did this for us, and they do this for us all the time. You just want to vent your frustration. Okay. Another example that would be, like you just found out that you have math and science and Chinese homework, and they're having, something for lunch that you don't want for lunch. You're just like, oh, could this day get any worse? You're not looking for someone to pop up and be like, actually, it can't get worse. It's about to start raining. No, you want to say out loud and kind of voice that opinion. And so the same thing happens in writing. You're asking a question that doesn't require an answer. You're just making a point, and you're using it in more than just saying the day was bad. Just, oh, could this day get any worse? Another literary device that can be fun and can bring in a lot more um, emotion, persuasiveness is onomatopoeia, which is simply words that imitate the sound that represent it. So whether that's words that represent um, sounds and actions, so bang for explosion, or pop, the sound of a crunch. Um, if you write things like knock knock, then you know that that's the sound that someone is making as they're knocking on the door. And there's obviously examples there in Korean as well. Um, every language has the idea of onomatopoeia, the idea that sound is written out in a way that when you say it, people can immediately know, oh yes, I know that sound. So the beating of a heart there with dugun dugun, or pita pat. Um, it's in doing that. Again, the reader hears exactly what it is, the type of sound that you're trying to convey to them. So it's that emotive language. Um, so yeah, onomatopoeia, you won't use it as much in persuasive writing as you would in more poetic styles of writing, but it can be used quite effectively, um, especially in examples like the third grade writing assessment for the second semester has traditionally been writing a graduation speech, and we ask them to talk about things that are going to be memorable as they're graduating. So, what do you remember? What is your fondest memory, or what is your strongest memory of school? What will you miss? And so, using things like onomatopoeia to describe funny or sad or scary, or any kind of situation can definitely help set the scene a bit more for the reader. They can understand why you feel the way you do about a certain situation. Rhyme is another one you won't use too often uh, in persuasive writing, but it can be useful in some circumstances. And with rhyme, it's just the repetition of similar sounds in two or more words. So we see here rice, ice, and price, or shoe, to, and view are just going to have the same sounds. And so that can be useful if you're just trying to kind of put more of a musical or lyrical flow to your writing. Again, not as useful in essay writing, but definitely a literary device uh, to be considered. Especially because if you rhyme on accident, um, it can sound a little weird when you're rereading it later. You might need to change a word because you don't want it to sound like it rhymes, because it takes away from how serious maybe your argument is. And then repetition is going to be one of the last literary devices that I talked about. And whereas rhyme is going to be just the repetition of sounds, repetition is actually going to be using the same word or the same phrase over and over again in a piece of writing. So there are a lot of different examples of repetition. And repetition can be useful in both writing and in speech, so oration, spoken word. And it's useful because it's going to focus the listener or the reader's attention on that phrase. So if you're using it with the correct term, it definitely is going to add emphasis. It's going to make things more memorable or more catchy. And it's also, like I said, with speech writers and speakers, it's definitely going to be a favorite tool because it makes a speech easier to follow because you can keep going back to that catchphrase or that repeated word because it's kind of driving home the idea. And it's, the reason why is because repetition has a powerful, or can be a powerful tool of persuasion, because the more you say something, the more people believe it, or at least start to change their minds. You can convince them that it's the truth, or at least is more true than anything else. So again, that's one of those kind of psychological things as well. If you say something often enough, even if it's a lie, eventually you start to believe it. So, you know, using that as a power for persuasion, you don't want to convince people of outright lies by any means. I'm not saying that's how you should use this, but if you say things often enough and loud enough and with conviction, it definitely helps you change people's opinion. It can be useful in a persuasive bit of writing. So, and then especially more so for the word, or not as much the word, but more for a phrase, kind of doing it gives that rhythm um, that some bits of writing and speech kind of need. It gives it more of a tone of lyricalness. Just kind of the flow fits a little better. And so I've included several different examples of repetition. You certainly do not need to memorize the terms here. Almost all of these different types have a Greek name of some kind, but I'm just going to quickly cover the examples of how they're used. So anaphora is the repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning that have different endings. So if you're interested in that, something like Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, or Winston Churchill's We Shall Fight on the Beaches address. Both of them use the beginning of this phrase consistently throughout their speeches. So, with Martin Luther King, he said, I have a dream, that such and such, that my my sons and daughters will be able to meet with other people and do this. I have a dream, or I had a dream about this. I have a dream about another thing. And so it's that repetition just over and over again of the beginning and then adding new ideas to it. That's anaphora. And epistrophe on the other side is going to be the repetition of the last word. So it's kind of the opposite of anaphora. So we see here, when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. So it's that repetition of as a child doing those things, that can drive home the idea that, it's about one thing, and then when we change it, it changes to another, right? Then we have this idea of simplos. So we see it repeated at the beginning and at the end. So example, when there is talk of hatred, let us stand up and talk against it. When there is talk of violence, let us stand up and talk against it. So we've kind of repeated the same structure over again. So when there is, and then talk of something, and then we repeated that again when there's talk of, but we changed this part, let us stand up and talk against it. So a bit more of a formatting issue, but it's definitely useful if you're trying to highlight just one bit. And then we get into some of these other more specific and more difficult literary devices. So we have the idea of antinaclasis, and antistasis, negative positive restatement, and then epizeuxis. So again, I'll leave these in here for you guys to look at. But the idea is just that there are different ways that you can use repetition to, whether it's give a rhythm to it, whether it's emphasizing a point, using the power of persuasion through repetition to convince people, or if it's just to gather the listener's attention. Repetition can be an extremely powerful thing to use. And then something else, just to clarify, repetition is specifically in this instance, what we're talking about is the repetition of words or phrases. We're not necessarily talking about the repetition of sounds. So the repetition of sounds is slightly different. So those would be things like consonants, where you repeat a consonant sound. So if, for instance, you read a poem where all of the words start with the letter C or the sound of a C, that's not quite the repetition we're talking about. So we're talking about actually repeating words or a phrase over again several times to make a point. So we're not talking about just the sounds. So hopefully that made sense. And so the last thing I have for today, before you guys go and go for your writing, is I kind of found this graphic talking about the 10 ways that you can become a better writer. And so the 10 ways you can become a better writer, for one, is to write. For two, it's to write more. For three, write even more. Four, write even more than that. Five, write when you don't want to. But six, write when you do. And seven, write when you have something to say. Eight, write when you don't, because it's also important to get used to writing even when you don't have something to say. Number 9 is to write every day, no matter what. And number 10 is to keep writing. So we started this class talking about how to become a better writer, you need to practice. That's really just what it is. It's writing. Writing only gets easier the more you do it. And there's only one way to get better, and that is through practice. So for the assignment for today and headed into the weekend, you are writing a rough draft for your essay. And like I said here, it is a rough draft. So try to remember the structure, use the literary devices and the transitions, the descriptive language, use your outline. You should have a very good kind of script for what your essay should look like if you did it. But ultimately, remember that this is a rough draft, and any feedback that you get from me, even though it says it's a grade on Google Classroom, it's just like for me to be able to show you where your score would be. Obviously you're not going to actually be getting this grade. It's not going to go on a report anywhere. No one else is going to know how you scored unless you want to tell them how you scored. But use this as an opportunity to try to see where your writing is. You've had time to think about it. We've talked about all those things. So see if you can put them down on paper in a way that would get you a high score. But realize that when I give you feedback, I'm certainly not judging you as a good student or a bad student. I'm certainly not going to think that you are the best essay writer or the worst essay writer based on your rough draft. Your rough draft is exactly that. It's rough. It's supposed to be the first time you put down all of your ideas on paper. So it should have all your ideas. It should have the good ones, the bad ones, the ones you're not sure if you're going to leave in for the final. So just keep that in mind for this assignment. Please, do your best, and don't stress about it. It's the ideas we want to practice, but don't worry about it too much. It's just to see where you are and what you can make for us. And then next week we'll be looking at editing. So we'll be talking about not only taking teacher feedback and the way that we would normally be giving you feedback, but also looking at things like self-editing. So what are some things that you can do so that when you start editing your own paper, that you can make it easier and more effective? Because I'll give you a hint right now. It's not very effective to just read it exactly the way it is on the paper. There's tricks you need to be able to do to really kind of pull apart your own writing and look at it. And then we'll also look at the idea of peer editing. So how you can do what we call a writing workshop in class. So when you hand someone your writing, what should they be trying to do for you as a peer editor? What are the things that they should be looking for? Things they should be giving you feedback on, and then on the other side, what are things they should avoid touching? What are the things that are not for them to discuss? So I hope that made sense. Um, Again, we talked about persuasive language. We talked about transitions. We talked about literary devices. So you should have all the tools you need to get started on your rough drafts and get them all squared away. And then we'll be ready to edit and talk about kind of finishing them off next week. So, do you guys have any questions? Never any questions. Okay. All right. Well, if you don't have questions, then you are free to go. I will see you guys next week. All right. Bye.